Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the LAGERS Disability and Survivor Benefits webinar. My name is Jeff Pabst. I'm a Public Relations Specialist at LAGERS, and before we get started with the webinar, I'd like to do a couple of housekeeping items. The first is, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, there is a menu bar that opened up when you opened up the webinar that allows you to type in questions. As you type in those questions, I will receive them. I will do my best to answer them throughout the webinar. However, some of them may be too complex to answer during the webinar, or I just may not have time to answer them. And if that's the case, I will do my best to answer them throughout the webinar. However, if I have to, I may just reply to you via email. But the good news is that you're going to get an answer to your question. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on our website for a later view if you'd like to view it. And a PDF of the slideshow that we're going to use today will be available on our website as well. So let's go ahead and get started. This webinar in general is going to cover the disability and survivor benefits that could potentially be payable to a LAGERS member. We'll do it in the order of disability first, survivor benefits second, and I will answer any questions even if they're out of order as we go through them. As a part of their LAGERS benefit, a LAGERS member or survivor may be eligible for a disability or survivor benefit. And when we speak of survivor benefits specifically, we're talking about active duty. So this is while someone's currently working. We're not talking about post-retirement. Post-retirement is a payout option, and that's another webinar that we do that you could view if you'd like. Now, this is going to speak specifically to if something were to happen to someone while they're actively working. LAGERS classifies disability in one of two ways, as either non-duty related or duty related. Non-duty related disability is when a member is permanently unable to perform his or her job. The disability itself can be mental or physical, and the disability was onset because of non-job related activities or illness. So in this case, this disability happened because or while the person was off the clock or outside of work. It's not where it's going to be while they're working. This is outside of that. To be eligible, the member must first become vested. So the first person had to be vested at the time of disability. If they were not, they would not be eligible for a non-duty related disability benefit. The benefit is calculated using current service credit and current final average salary. So it's as if the person had retired on the date of disability, and then that benefit is paid for the rest of the person's life. So that's non-duty related. Duty related is a little bit different. Again, the member is permanently unable to perform his or her current job. It can be mental or physical. And however, in this case, the disability was onset because of job-related activities or illness. An example of a duty-related disability, and specifically a potential mental disability, would be, say, an animal control officer who gets attacked by a dog. Well, their wounds may heal from the attack. However, they may never be able to be around dogs again. That could be potentially a mental disability. because they would not be able to perform their animal control job because they wouldn't be able to be around dogs. For duty-related disability, the member does not need to be vested. Vesting is immediate for duty-related disability, which means day one on the job, a loggers member is eligible for a duty-related disability benefit. Service credit for the benefit is extended to age 60. So instead of the benefit being based on the current service credit and current final average salary, it is instead based on the current final average salary, but the service credit is extended as if they'd worked till age 60, regardless of their actual retirement age. And that benefit is paid for the member's lifetime. So an example of a duty-related disability would be someone who goes out on a disability at age 30. And in that case, if it's duty-related, in that case, we are going to extend an additional 30 years of service credit to that person and pay that for the remainder of their life. It's a pretty substantial benefit when comparing it to non-duty related, where there is no extension of service credit. For a member to claim a disability benefit, there is a process in which they have to go through. It's not quick and easy. There are steps to it. The first step to this process is submitting an application for retirement, which doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes. You're like, application for retirement? Well, we consider disability just to be a type of retirement for our purposes. So they just fill out an application for retirement and they check the duty/non-duty disability box. After that comes the doctor's review. This doctor's review is a medical committee of 3 doctors that reviews the disability claim and verifies or denies that it is a permanent disability. Now, these 3 doctors consist of your doctor, our doctor, and a doctor that is commonly agreed upon by the 2. After the doctor's review comes the disability committee. The committee will review the application with the doctor's review and approve or deny the claim. Once they have approved or denied it, it ultimately has to go through the Board of Trustees, and then they make an approval of the benefit. After that, the monthly benefit begins. Now, this is a lot of steps to complete, so sometimes it takes a little while to do. An example may be that, say you want to begin your disability benefit on July 1st of this year, and you apply within the 30-day period that we ask you to apply within, and you get that all done, but it takes this process a little bit longer than a month to actually get completed. Well, when that happens, that means that the benefit would then be payable on August 1st because it took us a little bit longer. However, because you met the timeline correctly and got it to us on time, we would still pay you your July 1st benefit. It would just be payable on August 1st. So you would get 2 benefits on August 1st, and then following August 1st, you would get your single benefit. Once a member is approved for a disability benefit, he or she must be reevaluated regularly to ensure that the disability was in fact permanent. And the rate at which a person needs to be re-examined, it depends on a few things. The first is, in the first 5 years, the person gets annual doctor's exams. So in this example, the start of disability is on January 1st of 2013. 5 years later is January 1st, 2018. So this person receives annual doctor's exams for the first 5 years. After that 5-year period, the person would get a doctor's exam once every 3 years, following the first 5 years. Then after that, once the member reaches regular retirement age, and say it's January 1 of 2028, there are no further doctor's exams required. And that's because it was assumed that the member would have already been retired at this point, and therefore no need to ensure that the person is permanently disabled because they would just have been retired. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. We just discussed disability benefits, and we discussed how we classify those and everything about those. Now let's shift gears and let's talk about survivor benefits. They operate very similarly to the disability benefit. The primary difference is that instead of the benefit being paid to the member, a death has occurred, so it's being paid to a surviving spouse or a dependent child. We classify survivor benefits in the same way that we classify disability benefits. There is a non-duty related death. So the death occurred because of non-job related activities or illness. The member must have been vested upon the date of death. And the benefit is calculated using current service credit. So it's as if the person had retired on the date of death. Duty-related death. The death occurred because of job-related activities. So this was because of work or an illness that was onset because of work. Vesting is immediate. So day one on the job, a member may be eligible, or survivor in this case would be eligible for this benefit. And again, the benefit is calculated with service credit extended to age 60. So they classify and they work the same way as the disability benefits, like I said, but the primary difference is we pay to somebody else other than the member. There's an order of operations in which LAGERS pays a survivor benefit. And the first person that could potentially be payable a survivor benefit is a surviving spouse. If there is a surviving spouse, they will receive the option A amount. For our purposes, this is the highest amount a beneficiary can receive from LAGERS. So state law automatically is going to pay them the highest amount that they could receive. Also, it's approximately 60% of the member's benefit. It's usually a little more than that. It's dependent upon the age difference between the two. And a spouse is someone who the member was married to at least 2 years prior to the death or onset of fatal disease, unless it was an accident. Okay? We would assume that any duty-related death is an accident. So this is for a non-duty-related death. The spouse must have been married to the member 2 years prior to the death or onset of the fatal disease, unless it was an accident. So what if there is not a spouse, but there are still dependent children payable? Well, in the event there is no spouse payable, each dependent child may receive an equal share of 60% of the member's benefit. So in this example, the member has one dependent child. This one dependent receives 60% of the benefit. In this example, there are two dependents. So each dependent will receive an equal share of the 60% or 30% each. And finally, in this example, there are three dependents. They will receive an equal share of 60% or 20% per child. Now let's define dependent for LAGERS purposes. A dependent child is a child up to age 18. Unless they go from high school to higher education, then the 18 extends to 23. Unless they are married. If they get married at any time, they are no longer a dependent. Now, in this case, you have three dependents, each receiving 20%. If, for example, the oldest becomes an independent, so they are no longer a dependent for LAGERS purposes and not eligible for a benefit. What happens to the other two dependents' child benefit is we still split 60% evenly, so their benefits increase to 30% each. And the same would be true if the middle child, in this case, becomes independent and the youngest is still a dependent, then they would receive 60% until they're no longer a dependent child. If there is no spouse and no dependent children, then there is no monthly benefit payable from LAGERS. The only thing that could be payable from LAGERS for someone who has an active duty death and has no spouse or dependent children would be their employee contributions. There is no scenario within the LAGERS system that allows for a member or their beneficiaries to receive less than what he or she has contributed to the system. So if you work for an employer that requires you to contribute 4% of your gross pay, those contributions go into an account with your name on them, and they earn interest. And then, if something were to happen to you, in that case, and that person has no spouse and no dependent child, then what would happen is we would take those contributions and refund them to your beneficiary of record, or if we do not have a beneficiary on record, or that beneficiary has passed away, then we will refund them to your estate. Really good question. Why are employees required to provide beneficiary information when the beneficiary is already defined? Is this just for monthly contributions? As far as for what's payable, it's just for monthly contributions. However, the reason that we ask for it is because if you were to ever go to contributory and you didn't list a beneficiary for that person at some point in your employer's existence, and that person's still working there, say they were hired really young and they worked there for 30 years, well, there could be a chance that you go back to contributory and then you didn't update your beneficiaries and you didn't have a beneficiary listed, and if something were to happen to that person, then those contributions would have to go through probate instead of just going directly to their beneficiary they have listed. How would a benefit pay with a spouse and dependent children? Well, it's going to pay to the spouse first. So if you have a spouse and dependent children, the spouse is going to be the one who's payable. The dependent children would not. However, if that spouse were to pass away, those dependent children could potentially be payable as well. Please, if you have more questions, please feel free to ask. I don't have any more slides to go. So if you have more questions, doesn't necessarily need to be disability related, but if you do have more, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'll leave the line open for the next 10 minutes. If you do not have any further questions after 10 minutes, I will go ahead and close the session.